Good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on from where in this world you are joining us today. Welcome to the for Critical Study of Society, ICSS for short, Sunday morning program at the Niebel-Proctor Marxist Library. My name is Raj Sahai, who along with Gene Ruyle and 6 other members of the program committee organize our weekly programs. ICSS was formed in 2004 to preserve Marx's heritage and to support emerging struggles for racial and gender equality and for socialism. The opinions expressed in our lectures, workshops, publications are those of the authors only and do not represent a group consensus on the issues discussed. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, who in his 11th thesis said, and I quote, philosophers have interpreted the word in different ways. The point, however, is to change it. Now, change is the only constant in the world, sometimes happening peacefully and at a slow, even pace, other times violently and at a rapid, uneven pace, such as we are witnessing right now. Men and women are agents of this change, some voluntarily, some involuntarily, others involuntarily. So today's program is on the war raging in Europe. Russian forces are locked in combat with Ukrainian forces in Ukraine for the 32nd day. The mass media owned by the capitalists everywhere has simplified this unfolding violence description. It is all one man, Putin, the Russian president, who's the evil incarnate, aggressor, and the other side is innocent Zelensky, Ukrainian president, the innocent defender. But the truth is not quite that simple. Last Sunday, Raj Sahai spoke on the history and motivations of rival capitalist camps engaged in this conflict. Today, we have a panel of intellectual activists who will present their analysis in the first hour, followed by what by today we hope is our practice, the second hour, your active participation, all those who have gathered here in discussion in our second hour. So our panelists today are Gene Ruyle, Emeritus Professor of Anthropology at Cal State Long Beach and President of the East Bay Chapter of Veterans for Peace. Mehmet Bayram is an independent journalist. His articles and translations can be found at sendika.org, based in Turkey. He's worked in the computer field in the past. Richard Fallenbaum is a member of the planning committee for ICSS Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. He has been a computer programmer. Larry Shoup is a historian who has been associated with Niebel-Proctor Marxist Library for more than 2 decades. And last but not least, Elazar Friedman, who has been a Marxist for the last 55 years or more, and has been an activist fighter for social justice and for socialism. Each speaker has 12 minutes, so that we finish in 1 hour or less. If you want to be brief, that's fine. And then there will be a couple of minutes of announcements and so forth. And then the second hour for discussion. We'll finish. Our formal talk will end at 12:30. And then informally, people can stay on and discuss it without a moderator for the next half an hour. So it'll end at 1 o'clock. With that said, I invite Gene to please take the floor.
Okay, well, thank you, Raj. And we're going to continue this discussion. And I just want to say that it was a group decision to have the discussion. But then as far as the write-up that we put into our our reminder emails. I was very careful. They left it up to me, and I was very careful because I didn't want to offend anybody. If I said it was, the war against the Ukraine, that would offend some people. Talked about the Russian invasion, other people would be offended, and so forth. So I just settled on the situation in Ukraine, and because we all agree there is a situation there. And I don't have a lot to say. I don't think, it's a huge war of false news about the false news. So fake news. So all I wanted to do was, in our East Bay chapter of Veterans for Peace has been discussing this for some time because it was clear that something was going to happen. But way back in March 12th, I believe, we had already taken our position on this with the slogan, "Bring our troops home, US out of Eurasia, abolish NATO," which states our position. And, way back in the times, I grew up during the war in Vietnam, but that's when I became intellectually and politically of age. And the slogan back then was, get the hell out of Vietnam. That was our pathway to peace. And I think that has to be the pathway to peace at the present time. So our statement was 4 points. 1, we urge everyone to read and study the joint statement of the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China on the international relations entering a new era and the global sustainable development, which was issued on February 4th. And I still think that's a good, we did spend some time on that before, and I think it provides a good framework for understanding what's going on. Secondly, our second point was the US funded pro-Nazi Maidan Revolution of 2014 constituted an existential threat to Russia. And that wasn't the only one, as we know, and we'll probably talk about that too. 3, there is no evidence that Russia plans to attack Ukraine. And this is a little bit past its due date, I think, as we all know. But, and the fourth resolution, which we passed unanimously within our chapter, is Veterans for Peace position should be bring our troops home, US out of Eurasia, and abolish NATO. And we still think that's the pathway to peace at the present time. And with that, I'll may come back later, but I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
So our next speaker is Mehmet Bayram.
Hi, thank you. In this issue, there are thousands of points to be made, but I'm going to start with a really global or a bigger picture, and maybe during the debate, we get into the nitty-gritty of it. I started with the Communist Manifesto because I believe that, the changes that were happening in those days is again happening and right in the heart of Europe. So a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the power of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guzio, French radicals and German police spies. This is how the Communist Manifesto starts 174 years ago. That exorcism of that specter is still going on today, one face being the war in Ukraine. The capitalist system at its highest and final stage is cracking at the seams. As the manifesto showed 174 years ago, all that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. With the phenomenon of imperialism, yesterday's contradictions have only been amplified and are no longer surpassable. While inter-imperialist wars seemed impossible due to an alliance created by the imperialist bloc to form the exorcises mentioned in the manifesto, supported further by the existence of the nuclear weapons, only a few years ago, even that seemed to be changing now, as profit rates of general capitalist system declines, resources get scarce, and only a handful of monopolies or oligopolies are left to enjoy the benefits of this dying system. The world is sharply divided between the imperialists and the neo-colonials. Even the old Maoist approach to the world geography as being the first world, the imperialists, the second world as the runner-up of the imperialist bloc, and the third world, the neo-colonials, has melted into air, leaving us with a sharp divide of an imperialist bloc and a vast stretch of neo-colonials. The so-called second world has gathered into an alliance, both to come under the leading imperialist power and at the same time to protect itself from the powerful alpha imperialist to be simply able to collect some crumbs. This section, the second world, has been integrated into the imperialist bloc, but still only plays second fiddle to the USA, the leading imperialist. A sharp and heavy line demarcates between the imperialist bloc and the neo-colonials. While the chance for any neo-colonial is nearly zero to cross this line and elevate to the imperialist side, there are two exceptions who are realistically pushing to be allowed to eat at the table instead of collecting crumbs on the floor. These are China and Russia. It is striking to see how these two countries are different from the rest of the neo-colonials. The reason why they were able to break the underdevelopment, the dependency, the industrialization and neo-colonization is the fact that they based their past economies on socialism. Their vast resources of human labor and access to natural resources were also crucial to make socialism work for them in their path to break the chains of underdevelopment. It is an irony, though, that the past socialist infrastructure is helping them lift above the others in the current capitalist development. Many believe the conflict in Ukraine is an inter-imperialist war. In order to justify, they go into great lengths to prove that Russia is an imperialist power. This proof is based on the 5 criteria Lenin carefully defined in 1916 in his day, in his concrete environment, that is 107 years ago. In 1906, imperialism was defined as 1. The concentration of production and capital has developed to such a high stage that it has created monopolies which play a decisive role in economic life. 2. The merging of bank capital with industrial capital and the creation on the basis of this finance capital of a financial oligarchy. 3. The export of capital, as distinguished from the export of commodities, acquires exceptional importance. 4. The formation of international monopolist capital associations which share the world among themselves. And 5. The territorial division of the world among the biggest capitalist powers is completed. Imperialism is capitalism at the stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies and finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the world among the international trusts has begun, in which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed. This is important, I believe, that a division of the world has been completed among the imperialists. As we can see, these criteria applies to 107 years ago. That is more than a century ago. With the spread of capitalism, these criteria applies to nearly every single country in the world. For example, Pakistan's direct foreign investment has increased in 2019 to 28% in 1 year alone. In 1 year, they gained 28% in foreign direct investment. The merging of the bank and industrial capital is already the main method of operation in most peripheral countries. The concentration of production in certain hands, monopolies, is the norm in most of the world and is not a debated issue, even in Pakistan. So most criteria of Lenin's definition of imperialism applies to Pakistan. So is Pakistan an imperialist country? These criteria defining imperialism must be redefined in the 21st century and is now failing to define the development of relations today, thus are not well suited to define Russia. Russia is a much more developed country than Pakistan for sure, but its development provided by its socialist past still does not qualify it as an imperialist country in the year 2022. Russia, as China, has not crossed that dark, sharp, and heavy line to be at the table, to be in the imperialist camp. As the recent sanctions clearly show, they too are heavily dependent on the world capitalist system. They are trying, they are pushing and shoving to jump the line, to get their share of the resources, exploitation, and the wealth of the world. And the imperialists will punish them and put them in their place, surely and definitely below that line that separates the imperialists and the others. This is what we are seeing materialize in the latest Ukraine conflict, an imperialist attack to put Russia in its place in the world order. It is not an inter-imperialist war. It is not a Russian aggression to build a Russian empire as the Western media tries to tell us. Putin is not a megalomaniac. He is a rational, nationalistic, and a capitalist leader, only trying to defend his natural rights, the right given by the UN to any and all nations in the world. Russia is a capitalist country for sure, just like Iraq was prior to the war. Saddam Hussein was a merciless, brutal dictator and a murderer leader. However, when imperialism attacked Iraq, violating all its own declarations of respect to sovereign nations, the left rightfully stood up against imperialism. Was that a defense of Saddam Hussein? Did we support Iraq against imperialism because it was socialist? Did we imagine that only those countries that had socialism needed to be defended? No. Then why are these questions being raised today against Russia's natural right to self-defense against a nuclear threat? Did we ask the question, are you an Iraqist or a socialist, to those defending Iraq's right to exist during the war? Did we righteously declare, let us remember, Iraq is not a socialist country, so there is no need to be on the side of Iraq? No, we defended Iraq's sovereignty against the imperialist invasion. Unfortunately, many in the left have fallen into the liberal imperialist rhetoric trap. Just to be relevant, just to become acceptable, some of our comrades have started to repeat the immense propaganda perpetrated by the deep state-controlled corporate media. The mesmerized lockstep following of the imperialist media at an unprecedented level, using anti-imperialist rhetoric. Some comrades on the left are even ignoring the neo-colonial clown comedian puppet Zelensky's subservient, slavish capitulation to the most organized terror organization in the world, NATO. They even ignored the unimaginable scandal on CNN, where Zelensky openly, unabashedly looked directly at the camera lens and said that in the talks before the war, Western leaders told him, we will never take Ukraine into NATO, but we cannot make it clear publicly. As many have reported, Why the hell did not the CNN anchor immediately ask him, then why the hell did you hide this fact from your people? This is one of the defining factors between a neo-colonial country like Ukraine, Turkey, Pakistan, and the imperialists. A clown puppet in the service of its imperialist masters takes this country to war, sacrificing maybe tens of thousands of both in Russia and Ukraine for the benefit of imperialism, capitalism, and the world system. The people of Ukraine, as well as in Donbass and Russia, will pay for the stupidity of this Nazi-supported and integrated imperialist puppet clown, so that the military budget in the US could easily be inflated, NATO gets to be justified, Russia is eliminated from capitalist competition, and imperialism breathes relief from facing another country trying to grow into the imperialist camp. It is our duty to expose that it was the US that threatened the world with nuclear weapons before Russia readied its weapons. As Sarah Flounders noticed, she writes, President Joe Biden threatened the EU on February 26, 2 days after Russia began its military operation in Ukraine, that the only alternative to going along with the US sanctions would be the Third World War. You have two options, he said. Start a Third World War, go to war with Russia physically, or two, make sure that the country that acts so contrary to the international law ends up paying a price for having done it. I know these sanctions are the broadest sanctions in history, and economic sanctions and political sanctions. However, the liberal media has made its impact on some of the left, who have been repeating the lies that turns this open threat on its head. Before the Iraq war, there was a 50% of support for the war among the US population. It grew to 72% when media was given the marching orders. In the first day of the occupation, 7,200 people were murdered by the US. We were given rosy pictures by the corporate media. The total, some say, is near 6 million for Iraq, with the recently deceased Marilyn Albright proudly declaring the war was worth the lives of more than 500,000 Iraqi children. Turkish writer Gaffar Yakınca observes that in a symposium on war convened by the Responsible Statecraft magazine, the journalists admitted they were used by the government and they are still being used today in the Ukrainian war. Peter Van Buren, who was a longtime US State Department writer and also served in Iraq, says, this is his words, as a state official in 2003, I was told that the media was not only interested in repeating the government lies, but I watched in horror the way the media spread those lies in exaggeration. The real editor at the time was George W. It was Bush. And when he stood up, the entire media took a stand. This time, the media is acting like a trumpet of the Ukrainian government and playing the drums of war. Almost all of the videos from Ukraine originate from the Ukrainian government and are based on controversial anonymous sources. Moreover, censorship of different sources is now operated not only on the pages of the New York Times, but also on social platforms. Imperialism is unable to control the challenges to a unipolar world. Some developed capitalist nations, such as Russia and China, are no longer wishing to be treated like the rest of the neocolonials. These countries owe their development not to a way chosen inside capitalism, but to a powerful base provided from their past socialist infrastructure. The war, both economic and physical, is to deny these countries a place on the imperialist table. I have only a few paragraphs. This was is an imperialist war, but we must be careful on how to use our words in a world and media controlled by imperialist wordsmiths. The meaning of the word imperialist war has also been hijacked to mean Russia as the imperialist. However, we must emphasize every time that the warmongers are, yes, imperialists, but the imperialists are the US, NATO, and the EU blocs. What we are seeing is a war of NATO-US imperialism hitting several birds with one stone. One, preventing a challenger capitalist country, Russia, to grow enough and push its way across the line into the imperialist bloc. Two, provide a reason to increase without popular challenge the Pentagon and the military budget. Three, concentrate and solidify NATO ranks as the reason for NATO's existence has become an issue. Four, force the junior imperialist bloc of EU to trade with US and drop Russia. Five, show fangs to China. Threaten it that they will face the same future if they continue chipping away at the Monroe Doctrine and try to climb over the demarcation line to the imperialist bloc. It is our duty to expose the hypocrisy of the imperialists and expose that this is an attack by imperialism to a sovereign country. We must expose that if we are truly against war, imperialism and capitalism must be defeated. NATO must be dismantled. Capitalism lives and thrives with wars. We must expose that two sides of the same people, Russians and the Ukrainians, are being made enemies and to hate each other, are being wasted away under the same imperialist threat. They must stand up against the capitalist regimes of their respective countries and their imperialist masters to establish a true people's and workers' system, socialism, if they want this war to end. Otherwise, they and the world faces calamities beyond our imagination. Thank you. I think I went a little bit far.
A bit long, yeah, okay. Thank you, Mehmet. And the next speaker from the panel is Richard Fallenbaum. He'll be followed by Larry Shoup and then Elazar last.
Yeah, I should just parenthetically, we didn't coordinate our presentation, so there's some danger that we'll be repeating ourselves, the presenters. I'll try and avoid that. In line with the Marxism, which suggests that we go from the general to the specific, I want to go like Mehmet from the global to the local and begin at the highest level. I think we're already involved in a third world war, which is a different character than the First and Second World Wars. First of all, it's more universal. It's more truly global than the First and Second World Wars. That's one thing. But the second thing is that it's not primarily or even in any major way a military war. It's a war conducted with various weapons, special forces and extremist groups, and doing the fighting, limited military engagements, but primarily economic warfare, political warfare, information warfare. We see now that it somewhat includes biological warfare also. And I think we pretty much understand that the two competing parties, as Mehmet pointed out, are the imperialist bloc, led by, actually controlled by the United States, and the bloc of countries around Russia, the partnership of Russia and China. As you can tell, as Mehmet pointed out, there's quite a bit of dispute among the Marxist left about the character of, there's no dispute about the character of US imperialism, but there is dispute about about the other bloc, and there is no consensus. As Mehmet pointed out, there's the theory, sort of, I'd say, on one extreme, of two equal imperialisms, fighting it out to achieve domination in the world. That the Russia and China are an equally imperialist force. That Russia and China are capitalist but not imperialist. That they're somehow not, but they're just rising powers that are looking to get a piece of the action, just like Germany and Japan did in the period leading up to World War II. And the last one is that it's fundamentally a struggle between capitalism and socialism. That Russia and China are fundamentally socialist countries. I'm not going to go into that today. I think it's a very important subject which needs to be gone into theoretically, especially on the character of socialism in this period. What is socialism in this period? If that's the right framework for us to use. But I think there's generally a consensus, as Mehmet suggested, that that Russia and China are the defending powers against the U.S. imperialist bloc. Incidentally, one big change from Lenin's time is that we don't, aside from the possibility of China and Russia, we don't have competing imperialism, more or less imperial. We have a kind of super imperialism. We have a Kautskian, I like to joke that we live in a Kautskian world. We have super imperialism, which is dominated by the United States imperialism. All the other former imperialist powers or the imperialist powers are subordinate to the United States. Germany, France, Britain, Japan, they're all vassals of the United States. I don't know if Pakistan even gets up to that level as a, and I want to refer people to before I end, I want to refer people to the excellent statement by the U.S. Peace Council, which Richard W. put in the link to it in the chat, where they described the defensive character and the legal character under international law of the Russian intervention, their denazification and demilitarization operation in the Ukraine. This is a peace action, definitely, in my opinion. And I think Marxists and revolutionaries should express their solidarity with Russia and by China, and with the people of the Ukraine who are defending themselves, who have so valiantly defended themselves from the neo-fascist regime in Ukraine, the Zelensky regime, what is now the Zelensky regime. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
All right, so next speaker from our panel is Larry Shoup. Larry, please take the floor.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Most of you don't know me because I've been pretty busy the last few years taking care of my grandkids rather than coming to the library, but I've long been active in the library and have spoken back in the early 2000s on some of my books. I've long been continuing to be a critic of U.S. ruling class and U.S. imperialism, its leaders, and the long train of U.S. war crimes against third world peoples and common war crimes against the natural environment. So I did want to say that I'm 78 years old and I have a lifetime of experience being an anti-war activist, demonstrating and even going to jail at times against U.S. imperialism. And I've written 5 books, 2 of them on the Council on Foreign Relations, the main U.S. imperialist organization, and also written some other books and many articles over the years, especially in Z Magazine, and made a lot of speeches at forums like this. Let me begin by refreshing people's memory about the U.S. war crimes, almost never mentioned in the U.S. media discourse or in U.S. universities, which, due to my left-wing views, banned me from teaching many years ago. But I have taught at the university level before I was banned for being a left-wing activist. Over the past almost 60 years, many of us, often led by Noam Chomsky, have demanded justice for the millions killed and more millions wounded and made refugees and had their lives destroyed by US and US NATO wars based on lies. I am talking about US wars and interventions in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Syria, Yemen, and more. These war crimes have been organized and commanded by representatives of the US capitalist ruling class, for example, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, and Joe Biden himself, who in his long career has always supported US imperialism and US wars and US war crimes. So Biden is a hypocrite. He's using moral posturing about trying Putin as a war criminal. Also, like in Putin's Russia, people who expose US war crimes are often silenced and persecuted, like Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange. US war crimes do not count in the US media, part of the lies that the US ruling class tells about themselves. This hypocrisy makes a rules-based world, one that abides by international law, impossible. Instead, we get the law of the jungle, wars and death, including ecocide on a mass scale as a means of solving disputes. The Russian war on Ukraine is the most important geopolitical event since the Soviet Union's collapse in 1990. This war will influence international relations and domestic class struggles going forward, likely for many years. By insisting on pushing NATO alliance to Russia's borders and pursuing an agenda of dominance, the US and NATO bear serious responsibility for what has happened. Implications include a possible strengthening of the still evolving Russo-Chinese alliance, strengthening the bloc division of the world. But a war was not required by Russia, in my opinion. I disagree with the other speakers on this. In this circumstance, I don't think Russia was attacked. It was not attacked by Ukraine. It was not threatened by Ukraine. The Putin regime is a kleptocratic, oligarchic, monopoly capitalist, dictatorial regime presided over by Vladimir Putin. Putin's heroic, barbaric, and unnecessary war must be condemned. It is an imperialist war to conquer Ukraine and add it to the Russian Empire. A dream of Putin. He's made speeches on this. You don't have to take my word for it. He wants to recreate the Tsarist empire of old. In short, the Russian invasion is not part of a noble Eurasian resistance to US hegemony, as is often portrayed, including here. Rather, it is yet another imperialist power grab by a dictator. This makes Putin a war criminal, just like Biden, Bush, Reagan, etc. Putin accuses others of being Nazis and uses this to try to justify his actions. But it is Putin that is acting like a Nazi, with his speaking about those who oppose his war and have been arrested as scum, traitors, insects. These are terms that Putin has used in terms of his critics, language that Hitler and Trump use. There are indeed Nazis in Ukraine. That's true. But there are also Nazis in Germany. There's Nazis in France. There's Nazis in Hungary. There's Nazis in Italy. There's Nazis in Spain, and there's Nazis in the US There's even a political party which is largely Nazi called the Republicans. Now we can't, have a war in all cases because there's Nazis in some countries. That is ridiculous. And the US Nazis love Putin. That's very interesting that Trump and Tucker Carlson and other people like that think Putin is great. That's very telling in my opinion. So the Nazis in Ukraine is no justification for aggressive war. Russian war tactics have taken a page from US crimes. US crimes in Iraq, like in in Mosul, and Fallujah, I think is the name of the other place that they bombed to smithereens. Israel crimes in Gaza and Saudi Arabia, and US crimes, Saudi Arabia's crimes in Yemen, Israeli crimes in Gaza and Saudi Arabia crimes in Yemen. Bombing cities to depopulate them, killing thousands of civilians in the process. These are war crimes, and they've been going on in the world in many countries, including the US, of course, and it's still going on, unfortunately, now in Ukraine. But Putin's war is not going well. The Russian army is bogged down now. Troop morale is war. And remember what Napoleon said about war, 3/4 of it is morale. Ukrainian nationalism is becoming stronger and it's creating a national epic and immense support worldwide. Western sanctions are hitting the Russian home front. The Russian economy is likely going to hit a depression, and war costs, according to some sources, and it's hard to figure these out, but they say it's $20 billion a day are the war costs of the Russian war in Ukraine. And remember what happened in 1905 after the Russian war against Japan. There was an uprising. It was suppressed by the Tsar, but Rosa Luxemburg wrote about the general strike, the mass strike. And in 1917, after another failed war, a defeat of Russia, there was another revolt in Russia. So it's early, but it appears that Russia will never control Ukraine. More likely, Putin's actions have planted a bomb under the Russian state. A bomb under the Russian state will explode. It might explode, we don't know when, but the Russian Revolution is possible in the future, another Russian Revolution. Inability to control Ukraine will frustrate the dictator, Putin, and possibly lead to additional miscalculations, such as using chemical, biological, or even nuclear weapons with extremely dangerous consequences. Talk about World War III. So in my view, to uphold the left's Marxist values and ethics, the left in the United States and NATO and worldwide should first speak the truth, condemn Putin's imperialist war and the war crimes resulting from that. Second, build solidarity with the Russian anti-war movement, the revolutionary movement possible in Russia, and Ukrainian resistance to Russian domination and to Ukrainian Nazis. Turn this imperialist war into a revolutionary war by raising revolutionary demands. Third, oppose US NATO turning the war into a full-scale inter-imperialist war. Reassert revolutionary working class internationalism. Fourth, insist that the twin dangers to the continued existence of higher life on this planet, nuclear war and increasing climate chaos, be recognized and prioritized. So national budgets must reflect this. We need a massive worldwide Green New Deal, not more military spending. Our guiding motto might be, workers of the world unite, neither Washington nor Moscow, international revolutionary solidarity from below against fascism, war, and imperialism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Our last speaker is Elazar Friedman. So Elazar, please take the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me get rid of this. Okay, I'm really glad that I got to speak after Mehmet and Larry Shoup, two contraposed presentations. And let me just say about myself very briefly, my field was molecular biology and biochemistry. And so I have a great interest in integration of science with Marxism. But let me go, what Mehmet built up is very important. And so I'm going to talk about the implications of the model that I subscribe to. And it's quite different than Larry's model, but we should all respect each other. That I agree. Imperialism that I'm interested in, that I make my political analysis based on, is the definition that Mehmet gave of the Leninist concept of imperialism, not a pejorative thing where you invade someone, you say horrible things, you grab a piece of their territory. That's not what imperialism is. I'm basing my analysis on the Leninist concept of imperialism. My judgment is as follows, repeating, of course, like Richard says, US and NATO, its creature, are the imperialist side. Russia is a dependent regional capitalist power, what's left of what was the Soviet Union. The context that I'm going to go by is the agreement that James Baker, the imperialist agent of US imperialism, made to Gorbachev, that if Gorbachev, unfortunately, naively allowed the capitalist reunification of Germany, East and West, that US imperialism and NATO would not expand into Eastern Europe, that is the Warsaw Pact countries. What they did is exactly the opposite. The goal of US imperialism, which Dick Cheney helped work out, is to encircle both Russia and China. So Russia, who dumped in a coup organized by Yeltsin in collusion with the CIA to have a counter-revolutionary destruction of what I call the worker state of the Soviet Union, led to not them being pinpointed and in the crosshairs of US imperialism's nuclear weapons. The same exact weapons are pointing at Russia and very close to their borders, not close to US borders, but to their borders. Okay, so my view is that the implications are, if Russia is a dependent regional capitalist power confronted using Ukraine, unfortunately, as a cat's paw, training their military, planning two coups, one in 1904, then, 2004, and the next one in 2014, using right sector coalition of fascist, extreme fascist groups, and the Svoboda that arose out of Nazi collaborators who helped attack the Soviet Union to overthrow a legally elected Yanukovych government. Okay, so my context is that Russia's reactions are supportable militarily, but not supportable politically, because Putin is a capitalist oligarch. It is a capitalist country, but they are going to be forced to denazify as much as they can, because those are the elements that are endangering their security. And the Ukrainian army, trained by the CIA and the US, must be demilitarized. They have a right to demand that NATO not be affixed into the Ukraine, and that Ukraine be neutral. And I do not consider that violating the self-determination of Ukraine. In my view, Zelensky, who is Jewish like myself, is a captive Jew who's going to be, if he steps the wrong way, he's going to be killed by the very people that he's made a deal with. I can send evidence that he made it colluded with the neo-Nazis, despite being Jewish, and many other things, that the maternity hospital was a fraud, that it was vacated. Only 3 people were killed, whereas the hospital we attacked in Afghanistan, 42 were killed and hundreds wounded and injured, and that the Azov battalion was using that hospital. So there's a lot of war propaganda. So again, the implications of this, on one side, an imperialist combine, the other side, a regional power. I like to give some analogies from history. They may not be identical. China under Chiang Kai-shek was a blood-soaked regime that murdered hundreds of thousands of communists, very corrupt, tied to imperialism in a million ways, but itself not an imperialist country. It was attacked by China, by Japan, an imperialist power. Even communists who had been murdered, who their comrades had been murdered by Chiang Kai-shek, called for the defense of the Chiang Kai-shek government, not politically, but to oppose the imperialists. Now, let's say China, knowing that it was going to be attacked, had preemptively attacked Japan. We would have supported that too. Let's talk about Brazil. Brazil under Getulio Vargas was a fascist regime, pro-Nazi. Nevertheless, let's say parliamentary democratic British imperialism was surrounding it, ready to attack, and the Vargas regime attacked this imperialist combine. We would have given critical support to this dependent capitalist power in the making, even though it had a pro-fascist government. So the Putin government is certainly no worse than the Getulio Vargas regime. It is not a fascist. There are fascists in Russia, and many of them are in Ukraine fighting with the Ukrainian fascists. And so my political position does not stem from curse words that Putin is an evil person. I do not support politically that, but I support the military counteroffensive of Russia. I do hope that the fact that they have now overcome the breach that U.S. imperialism fomented between the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union is going to heal, and that will have a profound effect on Russia. And I also hope the fact that they're forced to fight imperialism, even though unfortunately using poor Ukraine as its cat's paw, that it will have a revolutionary effect on Russia. This could be wrong. I want to mention that however I project my ideas, they could be wrong and might be required to be revised. I used a model of Leon Rosenfeld, a Marxist physicist who worked with Niels Bohr, who said our most treasured ideas, totally validated and tested out a million times. We have to be ready to junk them when new criteria evolve. So if I'm wrong, I will openly admit I'm wrong. But right now, that is my position. Thank you very much. I want to give appreciation that through your library, I learned about Yusuf, that has deep intellectual knowledge, even though I don't agree with him. And the same thing, I would like to credit Mehmet with a very excellent presentation. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Elazar. So now our panelists have spoken and we're within the 1 hour that was specified. So what we will do now is have a break for 2-3 minutes and announcements. First of that will be requesting Gene Ruyle to announce the upcoming program, followed by Richard Fallenbaum for fund appeal. And then Alan, would you please also talk a little bit about our website? And then we'll return to the second hour, which will be question answer. So please raise your hand. And the way you do it is go to the reaction button and there you can raise your hand. So with that, Gene, please make the announcement. Thank you.
Yes, am I on?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Okay, next week, April 3rd, 10:30 to 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, we have Robert Jensen speaking on an inconvenient apocalypse, the 4 key challenges facing humanity, size, scale, scope, and speed. And that should be an excellent program next week. Following that, I think we have Judy Greenspan speaking on the Workers' World Party. Following that, Laura Wells on the Left Unity slate in the California primary. And then I think we might have something on Marxism and science. And then on May 1st, I have something on the abolition of war, anthropological perspectives. So we have some good programs coming up, and we will continue send out our announcements and look forward to seeing you. And I'm really pleased to see we have a lot of new people here, and I hope you stick with us on other things. So back to you, Richard.
Richard, please unmute yourself. Richard Fallenbaum. Okay, maybe he stepped away.
Okay,
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
I cannot restart my video, but I think I'm on your.
Yes, we can hear you.
Speaking.
Yes.
Yeah, the ICSS, which sponsored these sessions for over 15 years, has some expenses, and we are open and we encourage financial contributions, which go partly to us and partly to the Newell Proctor Library in Oakland, Newell Proctor Marxist Library in Oakland, which is the physical home of ICSS. So I put some information in the chat on how you can contribute. We especially encourage recurring contributions, which you can either make through your bill pay feature in your bank or through Patreon. Actually, your bill pay feature in your bank is preferable. We're exploring the use of Zelly, and if anybody's interested in doing that, please contact me. At any rate, the information on contributing is in the chat. It's also in the email you receive announcing this meeting, and it's also on our website, ICSSmarx.org, which I encourage you to check out. So that's it. Thank you.
Before we go on, I'm now going to, since it looks like we are going on to Q&A session, I'm going to now allow
no,
people.
Alan, I would like Alan to speak on the website.
Yes.
A little bit so that people are aware about our website. Alan, do you want to make that announcement?
Yes, thank you, Raj. I just wanted to call everybody's attention to the our website, our newly revised website, which was developed by our crack technical team. It is at ICSSmarx.org. And for those of you who haven't been to the website, there is a means to sign up for our mailing list, which when you go to the website, a pop-up form comes up that allows you to sign up, and you will receive every week an announcement and a link to our next session. Also on our website are future presentations, so you can check on what's happening next. And we also have on our past presentations page, all of our presentations going back for over a decade now, including video, links to the videos for those that were recorded on YouTube. Finally, I'd like to call your attention to the fact that you can contact us by going to the Contact Us page on the website. If you send us messages there regarding sign up, proposed speakers, etc., we'll get back to you promptly. So check out our website. It is at ICSSmarx.org. Thank you.
Okay, Alan. So now we go to the comments and questions period, and the methodology of it would be like this. Each person who wants to raise a hand, I'll try to go sequentially, but if I go out of sequence, please don't get upset. I'll get to you. I will have a method to my madness. But if you're commenting, that's fine. I will not ask any panelists to respond to your comment. But if you have a question, I will ask you to, because since there are 5 panelists, just specifically ask that question to one panelist that you're asking, so that in the end, all panelists will have chance to address whatever notes they're taking about questions, and we'll give them 2 minutes each. So that's how I like to go. Otherwise, if all 5 of them respond, then people won't be able to present their questions and comments. So, and also, I will not go to the presenters now. I'll just go to the audience who have been participants. And then when that list is up, then I will go to the presenters with whose hands are raised. So Hisham, you are first. Please unmute yourself and then make a comment or ask a question to a specific panelist.
Hi, somebody said Hisham Abad is an interesting question. Actually, my name is Hisham Abid, but my tribal name is Al-Quran, which is somebody relates it to one of the Prophet's followers who came later followers, but he was admonished by God for opposing the Prophet or challenging the Prophet. So that's the background of my name. I have a question, but it might sound like a comment. And my question is to the panelists, anybody is, what about the Zionist factor? I'm Palestinian, and that my bias for this question, of course, is obvious. So my comments that come with this question is that we as Palestinians, we always considered Ukraine as a second Israel, because many of Israel presidents, very famous personalities, who have been very effective in colonizing my people and the Palestinian people in general in Palestine. For example, Golda Meir was from Ukraine, and 2 or 3 Israeli presidents. Currently, I saw on TV that Israeli agents actually started to recruit Ukrainian refugees to send them to Israel. And it's not surprising because Zionism is famous for collaborating with the Nazis in the early 30s and 40s to send refugees to Palestine. Zionism, I mean, I'm trying to say that Zionism must be involved in what's happening in Ukraine. I haven't seen that in the media and haven't seen it also even here. Zionism doesn't care really about theology. They infiltrate all politics. Okay, they are so strong in the US media, for example, which if you notice, I mean, I always check the speakers or their guests. There's a huge percentage of them who have Zionist background. So the US media, which is making all this fake news, is to a large extent also influenced or maybe even controlled by Zionists. Zelensky spoke to the Knesset, for example. Why speak to the Knesset? Israel is such a small country if it wasn't so much has interest in this war. Also, the influence of Zionism we can detect it. Biden himself has declared that he is a Zionist. And if you also go check the background, the people surrounding him, like the Secretary of State, his Chief of Staff, many of the intelligence person who she made her chief of all the intelligence in the United States is a Zionist. His spokesperson worked for the Israeli intelligence at one time, and so on. Is Israel a part of this super imperialism that you spoke about? And is it also part of the ruling class of America, which is involved in being a super colonialist, Palestine being an example? So that's my question.
Okay, so I will ask Richard Fallenbaum, because he used the thing about super imperialism. We'll start from there, followed by Elazar to speak, and then if Gene and Larry and they also want to, and Mehmet want to add to it. So let's start with Richard Fallenbaum response to this, and then Elazar.
Well, I don't have anything much detail. I think Mr. Abad made some good points. I think it's interesting the contradictions that have been exposed, because Israel itself in this conflict has been a little bit not so all in with U.S. imperialism, because the question of Nazism in Ukraine is a very sensitive factor for Israeli Jews, no matter what their views of Zionism. So the Israeli ruling class has to be sensitive to that, and it cannot be completely supportive of the U.S. imperialism in this particular case. And Israel has attempted to be sort of balanced between Russia. It has a lot of Russian immigrants and Soviet immigrants, so it's trying to balance a little bit between the two camps. The question of Nazism, which Larry Shoup raised, I think he distorts the issue. It's true that there are Nazis in all the capitalist countries, but Ukraine is unique to some extent, in which Nazis and extreme nationalists are in state power, share state power. Not the Ukrainian regime is not all Nazi. It's not a Nazi regime, but its basic objectives are fascist. This ethnic cleansing, the ethnic purity, Ukrainian, suppressing the German, Russian language, and also the other ethnic groups, Hungarian, Poles, the brutal attack on the Russian ethnic groups in the Donbass. These are fascist policies. So we need to not confuse fringe Nazi groups in many countries with the Nazi character of the regime in Kiev.
Okay, Elazar, please, you address this point also, if you like to. Turn your microphone on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I respond to Hisham in great respect. There was a journal in Palestine called Filastin that exposed the hideous Tsarist plot against Menachem Mendel Beilis and called it the disgrace of the 20th century. So within the Palestinian movement, there's definitely was a powerful force against anti-Jewish sentiments, and not to conflate that with Zionism. And I would also just want to add very briefly, I don't want to get into a big debate on this. Unfortunately, a whole section of Palestinian nationalism under the Grand Mufti was pro-Nazi. How that evolved is another story. Some of it evolved because of mistreatment by the Zionist movement, but Amin went to Auschwitz and also collaborated with the Nazis. And this does not excuse the Zionists. But let me talk about the Ukraine again, because Richard made a very important point. The head of security, the army, the police, intel are riddled with fascists in the government, have cabinet positions. It's not, again, like Richard says, not fringe. And Richard also mentioned that they attacked and killed 14,000 people in the Russian-speaking sections of the Donbass. This was done by groups like the Azov Battalion, out and out open Nazis. So in these countries like France, even the United States, they don't have military forces right now, and they're not though they riddle the police forces covertly, overtly. It's not the same thing. They are not. You have an armed fascist forces in the Ukraine, and I do believe Russia will be forced to repress. And what I didn't mention, what I want to say very quickly, is that if I felt both sides were imperialists, as Russia and the US, NATO, I would call for turn the gun the other way and defeatism on both sides. And there are left-wing groups that do that. I do not characterize it that way. So I call for turn the guns the other way against US and NATO, and military support for Russia's counteroffensive, but severe political criticism of Putin. And I don't think that Trump was a fascist. That's a lot of crap to get people to vote for Biden. He was a demagogic, anti-immigrant, racist dog, but not a fascist. He did not have the proper credentials of being a billionaire to head a fascist movement. He could stir them up like the Proud Boys, but that is a device used to get left-wingers to vote for Biden, who himself is a racist dog that worked with James Eastland to defend school bus desegregation. So let's not conflate all these issues. Let's try to distill out of all this a real Marxist-Leninist position of how to characterize the conflict between Russia and US imperialism into Ukraine. Also, I do not agree that China is an imperialist power. I think it is a severely deformed worker state with deep imperialist economic penetration. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I want Larry, since his statement came under criticism. Larry, please address the issue. Larry Shoup.
Mute, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yes, this question of whether or not the Nazis are fringe in Ukraine, there's all too many of them, of course, and some are in the government. But it's interesting to note that the Nazi party, they call it the Slabov Party or something like that, they got about 10% of the vote in 2012, and then they dropped to 5% later on. And then when the Nazis killed 40 people, Russians in Odessa, 30,000 people came out to support the victims. So the point about that I'm making is Ukraine is a very divided country. It's divided east-west, it's divided linguistically, it's divided in a lot of ways. So to focus on some Nazis and say that the Nazis in other countries are just fringe, well, in France, depends on how you define Nazi, but the right-wing organization, the party in France, is almost being elected. And in the US, the Republicans, are they fringe Republicans? A lot of them are Nazis, I think. They're right-wing. Now, it depends on your definition of Nazi, fascist, so on. I don't agree with Elazar saying that Trump isn't at least a neo-Nazi or a neo-fascist. He's a strong man, racist, and, wants the billionaires to run everything. That to me is pretty close to fascist. But his question was really about, is Israel part of US super imperialism? And I would say, yes, it is. Israel army is used by US imperialism as its instrument in the Middle East. And so it's definitely part of super imperialism, the Israeli state. And it's, well, I'll stop there. Okay.
Okay, so maybe Mehmet and then Gene. Gene had his hand raised, but I'm going to ask Gene to comment only on this one. So Mehmet, you go first.
Yeah, thank you, Hashep, for bringing the issue of Zionism. In the world politics, really, even the definition of Zionism or being against the Nazis fades away when there is an interest of the country of defending of imperialism. Even when Israel was being born, the Zionists collaborated heavily with the Nazis. I mean, the head of the concentration camps was taken by Zionists on a ship that had two flags, one of the Nazi swastika and one of the Star of David, to tour the Palestine to tell the Nazis that it is in their best interest to get rid of Jews so that they can emigrate to Israel. There were coins printed, one side having the Star of David, the other side having the Nazi swastika printed. There was no problem between the Zionists and the Nazis at that time, as long as it serves the purpose of the of Israel. So that's why this is not going to be an issue. Yes, there are contradictions. We can see those contradictions. But for them, as long as it serves imperialism today, I don't think that's going to be an issue. One thing that maybe Larry can answer later on, I heard in his presentation that Nazis love Putin, he said, in the United States. I don't think that's a true statement, because even even several reports came out that Nazis, as well as Europe, from the United States, are going to Ukraine to fight on the side of the Nazis against Russians. I mean, there's this guy that was caught. I think he killed his wife after coming back from fighting in Ukraine and trying to gather money for the Ukrainian fascists and the Ukrainian government. He's one of the, I don't know, Proud Boys or whatever, those organizations. But he was caught after he killed his wife coming back from the war in Ukraine, helping out the Ukrainians on that. So thank you for bringing it up, Hashim. That was a very important question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mehmet. Gene, do you want to comment on this subject? Your microphone. Yeah.
Am I on now?
Yes, you're
okay,
on.
great. Yeah. Again, I have to say I really am a goy, although I have a whole flock of Jewish kids and grandkids. So this is somewhat personal also. And I also want to say that we've had an excellent speaker, Wadi Halabi, who was born in Palestine in like 1945. So he's been a refugee, ever since he was 2 years old. And he's also a member of the Communist Party USA, close to the Chinese. And he provides, his talk was recorded. So he provides some very good insight on these issues. But the other thing I want to say about this is some people have commented on newscasters discussing what's going on in Ukraine and saying, and these are all blonde, white-skinned, blue-eyed people this is happening to. Isn't that horrible? There's a horrible amount of flat-out racism. And I think some of the speakers from Black Agenda for Peace and other Black Americans commenting on these are very important in putting this into perspective. So I'll stop.
Okay, thank you, Gene. So what I'm going to do is go to the people whose hands are raised. So please ask a question if you're going to, unless you're commenting is fine, but if you're asking a question, please address it to only one of those panelists, because otherwise I won't be able to get through. So of the raised hands here, Richard and Yusuf, Gulden, and Alex. So I'll start with Richard.
Yeah, well, I was worried we'd run out of time. I wanted to, I'm sort of disappointed that Mark Albertson is not here. I wanted to sort of extend his analysis that in point of fact, what we're witnessing is not a new feature, that in fact it really started with the US's assault on Iran back in the 50s with the overthrow of, forgive my memory lapse, but the overthrow of the installation of the Shah's Iran, let's put it that way. And it continues today with the U.S. once again trying to assault the Russia, and in fact assault China. So in fact, it's really a tripartite assault, and it's extended since roughly it's been in place since roughly the 50s, and I think we really need to get beyond, once again, analyzing this in terms of strictly national programs. That in point of fact, this is really an international effort made up of, NATO is really representative of what, 30-something states now? And so it's really not just, yes, the United States is first amongst equals, if you will. And I believe a decline. But we really need to start looking at this in terms of the U.S. assault on Russia and the U.S. assault on China as being sort of a pincers movement. So I'll stop. But thank you. The overthrow of Mossadegh. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm going to go out of sequence to Trehan in New York because he has connection, he has family, people he knows in Ukraine. So then I will follow in the sequence, which will be Yusuf, followed by Gulden, followed by Alex, followed by Janet. So Trehan, please go ahead.
Okay. One is a comment and another one is some information from Kharkiv. I believe the U.S. wants to turn Ukraine now into an Afghanistan. Hillary Clinton was interviewed a couple of weeks ago. I saw her, and she mentioned this is going to be Russia's Afghanistan. So I think the CIA and the U.S. NATO are already planning that. So I think this war is going to change or make Ukraine become a battlefield, which is really upsetting. I got an email from a relative who lives in Kharkiv, and they are really suffering. There's no medicine. This email came to me today. There's no medicine. People are dead in the streets. The buildings are destroyed. There's no water. They have been able to queue for food. And even animals are dying. People's pets. There is a zoo you mentioned. The animals are dying there. So this war has to end quick. But after listening to Biden's speech yesterday, it was definitely escalation of this war. And I got really upset when I heard that. So, and there's another question I have. When we talk about Zelensky, now they always mention he's Jewish, but how can he be Nazis in Ukraine if he's, if the leader is a Jewish? The term capo, isn't the term capo mean a Jewish person who cooperates with Nazis? I read something about that. That'd be a question. That'd be this. I guess that would go to the third speaker. I forgot his name. So that's on the mind when I want to say.
Elazar.
No, Elazar was the fifth. I think he's meaning Richard Fallenbaum. Is that right? Anyway, but Elazar has a lot of knowledge of that. So Elazar historically tracks a lot of this. Elazar, would you like to respond to that? Okay. Or Richard Fallenbaum, if you want to respond to it. But I'll not go to many people, just this question of
I'm trying to unmute. Can you hear me, Raj?
yeah, okay. Yes. No,
all right. I just want to mention.
Elazar, go ahead. Elazar is frozen right now. His frame is frozen, so that means there's a problem of bandwidth. Alan, you want to say something? Okay, so Richard, do you want to respond to it, Richard Fallenbaum, on this issue? Okay, well, why don't we go to the next, or Larry, do you want to respond to it?
What I think a capo is a kind of a comprador. That is somebody within the Jewish community that serves the interests of other people, including fascists.
Okay.
That's what my understanding of it is, but I'm no expert on that. I think someone else.
Okay. So I'll go to the next person, who is Yusuf, followed by Gulden, followed by Alex, followed by Janet. And then Hisham wants to come, but I'll hold Hisham's thing unless if there's nobody in the first round, then Hisham will get a chance. So Yusuf, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think I agree with grosso modo, with all the speakers, I'm on the same page except Lawrence. Let me make the point that presently in Ukraine, the Communist Party was outlawed, communist symbols were outlawed, but people were getting away with Nazi symbols, glorifying former Nazis. There's a war on the Donbass that has not been mentioned in this forum, which is important. It has been going on since 2014. Also, the two communist youth members are facing, are being charged with treason, possibly facing execution. And recently, not only the Communist Party, but all leftist parties, all parties that oppose NATO, that oppose EU, have been banned. This is clearly, there is no, it is asymmetric. There is no symmetry. And the fight against Putin, yes, I rather not say Putin, but against the ruling class and regime in the Russian Federation, yes, but that's a fight for another day. So these are my comments. There are, I have some, and I think I have some things to discuss with Elazar, that's fine. Also, it's true, Ukraine is divided, yes, but it's not a war against Ukraine. It's a war against certain political forces in the Ukraine. And yes, it's to the credit to the Ukrainian people that they voted for a candidate that allegedly came out with peace, for peace, that Zelensky, but completely reneged on his promises. It's to the credit of the people of Ukraine to have voted for him, but it's meaningless because he only served as dressing. Okay, thank you.
Okay, unless Larry wants to respond to it, I will go to another. Larry, do you want to respond, or should I go to the?
No, there's nothing to respond to. Go ahead.
Okay, Gulden, you are next. Gulden?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want a clarification. First of all, I want to thank all the speakers that really informative discussion. And I fail to see the difference between what Mehmet and the Elazar said. I just need a clarification on that. They both said that Putin is a dictator, and they both said that, Mehmet gave an example of Saddam in Iraq, and the leftists talked for Saddam against American imperialism. And Elazar said, gave an example of Chiang Kai-shek against the Japan imperialism. And leftists that even though it was a brutal and dictatorship and everything, the leftists still supported Chiang Kai-shek against Japan imperialism. And Elazar said that Russia is not a imperialist country, just a regional capitalist power. And he said he supports Russia or militarily, but not politically. So these are the lines that that pretty much Mehmet Bayram said. So I just failed the difference. So somebody please answer, probably either Mehmet or Elazar.
Okay, so why don't we start with Elazar, and then Mehmet, you come after that for response, because it's addressed to the two of you. Elazar.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand what Gulden said, but I do characterize Russia as a non-imperialist. That doesn't mean they're nice. That doesn't mean they're not attacking. That doesn't mean that they're not going to shoot some civilians, and even accidentally, I hope, children, babies. It's a hideous product of war. So I'm not sure what her question was, but in the contraposition between imperialism on one side and a regional capitalist power on the other, no matter who does the actual first starting, I call what Russia's doing a counter-offensive, and it's defensive. The goal of U.S. imperialism is not just to encircle Russia, but to dismember it into maybe 7 sub-regions so they can be controlled and never contest U.S. hegemony, imperialist hegemony. And so any power, whether left or right in Russia, faced with such a prospect to dismember the country, encircle it, is going to have to operate. And we're using Ukraine as the final link, the most dangerous link in this encirclement of Russia. It's been very successful. In a certain sense, Russia is ringed by and targeted by U.S. missiles and bases around the world. We have over 1,000 military bases around the world. Russia does not. They recouped in the Crimea their base in Sebastopol, which I supported, by the way, again, critically. Thank you.
Okay. Mehmet.
Yeah, I agree with, I don't know, I can't find a point where I differ with Elazar on these points. Yes, critical, I don't know if to say critical support, but militarily I support, but politically I also am opposed to Putin, just like I was opposed to politically to Saddam Hussein. But when Iraq got attacked by imperialism, we defended Iraq. So anyway, there's not much difference between what we are saying. Thank you.
Okay, next is Alex Reinhardt.
Alex.
Am I coming through?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is more of a comment. The one thing that I would further just like to kind of like give proper context to is kind of the differentiation of this Ukrainian fascists from different fascist forces throughout the world. And the one thing that I think should definitely be pointed out a lot more is the fact that the Azov battalion and the Azov battalion, also especially, they were officially integrated into the National Guard of the Ukraine. The equivalent of that would be if the KKK or the Proud Boys, this racist, this belligerent military force outside of the state, outside of it's like separate from the military, was officially integrated into the American National Guard. And that is, that just further shows how like dangerous and how far along the fascist struggle, the cause of these fascists is in Ukraine, because so not only do they have these head cabinet positions, they also have their official paramilitary forces accepted into the National Guard, the National Guard of Ukraine. And the other thing too, so I think it's important to kind of look past just like the whole 10% vote or the 4% vote in Parliament, because that definitely applies, but it's also something but to look beyond and see how they are woven into the very fabric of the state. the very fabric of the state. And that's all I have. I kind of feel bad to not have an official question, but finished.
Fine. That's fine. Okay, so since it's a comment, I'm going to not ask anybody to respond. I'll go to Janet Copeland.
Okay, hi. So several things. Early on in this webinar, I posted some things about some items referring to a possible proxy war or probable proxy war that the US is waging against Russia via Ukraine. I don't know, I don't think anybody commented on that. Addressing Larry directly, I'm kind of confused about your sources for what you're saying the status of the Russian side is, that it's weakened or that it's whatever. I don't know if you have been following directly what Putin, his addresses. Have you listened to or watched or read transcripts of Putin's addresses? I think, well, the February 24th especially, and I think February 26th was a second one, and then March 16th. And have you also watched the webinar where Scott Ritter was interviewed, or there was a conversation between Max Blumenthal and Aaron Maté with him, and it's a completely different perspective on what's going on. And then finally, I wanted to respond to Hisham. And Hisham, I sent you a private post. I would like to get your email address if you wouldn't mind, regarding the Israel connection. In the Pandora Papers, remember that? There is reference to a Ukrainian Israeli, a Jewish Ukrainian Israeli. So he's Israeli besides Ihor Kolomoisky. He's an oligarch in Ukraine, and he is behind Zelensky. What's that all about? There's other connections as well. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, so I will go to Alan next because he has not yet.
Well, I had asked Larry.
Okay, so it's a question is directed at Larry. Okay, Larry, please respond.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, no, I haven't seen Putin's talks on those dates. And it's possible for anyone to be wrong about current battlefield conditions. It's just my reading from what I have, and obviously no one can read everything, and I haven't. From what I can tell, it looks like Russia's plan to quickly conquer Ukraine has failed. And it looks like because they're having to spend so much money on each day, $20 billion is what one estimate is, that they're going to run out of money. They've also had serious sanctions against them. So it appears to me that they're going to lose the war. Ukraine is fighting very hard. Nationalism has increased in Ukraine. Russians thought, many of them thought the Ukraine was their friend and people were going to welcome them with open arms. That isn't the case. Certainly the CIA and US militarism is giving them weapons. So it looks to me like nobody knows for sure. And Putin doesn't know for sure either, I don't think, even him, who's going to win. But it doesn't look like Russia can control Ukraine. And it looks like it's going to be bogged down, a long war. And with Russian people suffering, there may be another possibility, as it happened before, a new Russian Revolution, because that's a fragile regime. It's a dictatorial regime. It's not in any way responsive to the people's needs. So likely there's going to be a lot more dissent. There's already been 15,000 Russians arrested in Russia because they held up a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and so they got arrested. A lot of them did that. So it's a very repressive top-down regime, and it's brutal as a result. I mean, it's brutal, but it's also brittle as a result, and it may fail. But nobody has these answers. So listening to Putin's speeches, I don't think that's really going to give me much of an answer about how Russia's doing in Ukraine. But the other reporters indicate that of course, they're Western reporters. They may be wrong too. It doesn't look like they're doing very well. So anyway, that's my answer.
Okay, thank you, Larry. I will go to Alan next. Alan, please.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to follow up on Janet's comment. I've been looking a little bit at this question of the role of the neo-Nazis and the Israelis and Jews in the Ukraine just a bit, started looking into it this week. And first of all, there is a concerted Western organized effort on the part of think tanks and other organizations to directly confront this issue because it is such a weak point in the pro-US NATO narrative that, oh, the Nazis, the neo-fascists don't play a very strong role in the government. Oh, Zelensky is Jewish, et cetera, et cetera. And what I found is that this is sort of a consciously promoted perspective. That being said, if you look at it in terms of the content, just the little bit that I've seen so far, number one, the neo-Nazis, the ultranationalists, played a very important role in the original Maidan coup, that they were really the main force that was relied upon by the organized elements that were behind the coup, the CIA, the US State Department. Number two, the Israelis actually are involved with, in some cases, arming and training these Nazi battalions, which has been referred to by Janet and Elazar. And I don't think that that's something that people should be surprised about, because as Elazar pointed out and Mehmet pointed out, the Zionists have always had a role in collaborating with Nazis at different points when it suited their interests. And this idea that Zelensky is Jewish and therefore it really kind of downplays and minimizes the impact of these neo-Nazis in both militarily and politically. And the last thing, this is something that I just have stumbled onto. Right now, in terms of the actual military situation, the neo-Nazi organizations are playing a very important role at a street level, actually seeking out and confronting, kidnapping, assaulting people who are putting forward an alternative, the resistance to this, their activities. They're hunting people down and going after them. They're playing a very important role. So I think that this idea that, they're only 2% of the voting bloc really serves to obfuscate and run cover for the point that they play a very critical role in the enforcement and the strength of the Ukrainian government. There, you don't vote a Stephen Bandera Day as a national holiday and rename the road to Baba Yar, where the direct ancestors of these people committed some of the worst atrocities of World War II. You don't name that road after Stephen Bandera. And at least that should set off a light in your mind about, well, hey, maybe there's something going on here, right? So anyway, that's my comment.
Thank you. Okay, so what we will do now, Mehmet wants to comment on it, perhaps, and Elazar, and then I'll go to Hisham. So let's go to Mehmet first, and then Elazar, followed by Hisham Abed.
Short points. Nazis and Zelensky. Zelensky went to the Nazi encampment, let's say. I believe there was this, let's say, stopping of the war at Donbass. And even though he was the leader of Ukraine, the Nazis turned to him and threatened him right there because he was asking them to stop firing, to abide by the conditions of peace that was supposed to happen at Donbass. And he had, although he's the leader of the country, he had nothing to say. He turned his back and went. And I believe that if he signs a peace treaty with Russia, he's going to be killed by his own Nazis. Just like the negotiator with Russians. There's a guy that was negotiating on the side of Ukraine with Russia. You know what he said? The mortal sin. He said that the Russian people and the Ukraine people are brothers. And he returned from negotiations. Next day, he was killed. Finished. So let's take this Nazi involvement in Ukraine very seriously. Second thing is that Israel's involvement in it, I believe, again, looking at the big picture, that there is, with the decline of the US imperialism, a multipolar world is emerging. And in this world now, the neo-colonials are really trying to pick who is the next boss going to be. And Israel is not alone playing both sides of the fence. Israel is very good still talking to and trading with Russia. It did not stop trading. It did not abide by the sanctions that US imposed, just like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia refuses to go with the sanctions. And so is Turkey. Look at all these neo-colonials that are dependent on imperialism are now actually trying to find the next boss. Look, Turkey is, I'm sorry, Turkey that has shot down Russian planes over Syria is refusing to comply with the sanctions and is directly talking to Russia. Look, the maker of the drones that Ukraine buys from Turkey to attack Russia, the maker has flown to Moscow and tried to say to Russians that he is shocked that his weapons are being used by Ukrainians to attack Russians. So they are playing both sides of the fence because the world is changing from a unipolar world to something else. So we have to be careful in that. And Israel's position is this also. They are not taking direct side with their imperialist boss, but are kind of like cautious. Thank you.
Okay, Raj stepped away for a moment. Elazar, if you would comment, Raj had asked you to comment. Please go ahead, Elazar.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
This is directly inspired by Hisham. In the Communist Party of Palestine, organized the Haifa oil refinery works, and it was both Jewish speaking or Hebrew speaking and Arabic speaking workers, and they had a united front, and they had a long history of united front actions where they wouldn't call upon the Haganah or the British police, that they form armed defense groups speaking both Arabic and Hebrew. And when either extremists, right-wingers in either nationalist camp would provoke, they would not call the police, they would mobilize these worker defense guards. However, this broke down in 1947 when the fascistic Irgun movement murdered Arab workers at the plant gate just there to get hired for jobs. And it led to bloodshed within the campus. Arabs went in and killed 34 Jews. Nevertheless, Arab workers defended many of the Jews, and it did not work on the railroads where there were also Jewish and Arabic workers many, many more Jews were defended by their co-workers. Now, this breakdown of a united front of workers is a product of Zionism to a great extent, undermining class solidarity. And it ended up with two different communist parties, an Arabic communist party and a Hebrew-speaking communist party, and which is a tragedy itself. So I oppose, there were in the Chazit Ta'am, a paper of the extreme right, Lehi, they said, do not call Hitler, be so quick to misjudge Hitler. If it weren't for his Jew hatred, he would be the national liberator of Germany. And Jabotinsky blew a wig. So there were sections right within the Zionist movement who knew that Hitler was a Jew hater, who nevertheless politically had support for that. So I'm not trying to cover it up, but Israel itself right now is divided, and there are Ukrainian Jews demonstrating against the government's position, and there are Russian Jews that have totally contraposed positions, but that's because of the people themselves, not the government. And Bennett has a different position than the foreign secretary, and so it's complicated. And the fact that they're still trading with Russia is fine with me. My position is what's necessary is a Jewish Arab worker state in a socialist federation of the Middle East, not from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, which means what's going to happen to the Jews. I think you need a revolutionary internationalist position. So one time I was a little stoned and I was singing in a kibbutz in the fields where mainly there were Arab workers and Jewish workers. And I was singing ancient Hebrew songs. And I opened my eyes and I was surrounded by Arabs with their hands clasped together, thinking that I was inspired by God, that no Jew hatred whatsoever. So that gave me hope that we could break through this filthy nationalist thing. Also on a bus in Israel, the bus driver slapped an elderly Arab in the face, and he pulled out a knife, and his sons did like Tai Chi in front of him to make sure he couldn't get near the bus driver. Bus driver called on an Israeli soldier, and he said, that Arab pulled a knife on me. And then I could speak Hebrew at the time, and I said, no, he started this with a racist attack on the Arab. And I said it 15 times, and finally the Israelis on the bus said, Be'emet, yes, he did. He's the one. So the soldier slapped the bus driver in the face. He says, your job is to take your passengers where you're supposed to be going. I just came back from the front too. You're not to be a racist anti-Arab. So there is hope even within Israel that we could mobilize forces to overcome this hideous breach and get Israel from being a stooge and a junior partner for U.S. imperialism. That's my goal. It's a very difficult one. Thank you.
Okay, I know there are three people who have raised their hands. Hisham wants to come in, but I'm going to give myself a little time here. So I actually want to go to Mehmet because he has said two things on theoretical issue on imperialism. And one is that Lenin's thesis is 107 years old. So the first question is the Lenin's thesis no longer applicable? So that's my first question. And if it is applicable with those 5 points that you say, and I agree, those are the 5 characteristics of imperialism, why don't they apply to China? So that's my question. And you're juxtaposing a separate theory, which is neo-colonial versus imperialism. But Lenin doesn't have a neo-colonial versus imperialism. So you can either have one or the other. How do you respond to that?
Excellent questions, Raj. First of all, when you look at this, let's say, very simple example from science. When Newton found the rules or the laws of gravity, that's what he had. But then we went on to find new things. and that became, quantum gravity and all the other things that are now more than what we knew at Newton's time. Does this mean Newton was wrong? No. Newton found the basis of it. And then we found more stuff, so we had to add more to it. To be complete, to be perfect, as much as we know now, we had to add on top of Newton what Newton did. And was Newton wrong? Yes. Was Newton right? Yes. So when it's 107 years ago, imperialism was coined and defined by Lenin, that represented what was there 107 years ago. So are you telling me that capitalism and imperialism never changed in the 107 years? They were frozen, fossilized, and nothing new came in? No, it changed like anything else. Dialectics 101. Second thing, neo-colonialism, where Lenin did not mention it. Of course he did not, because neo-colonialism wasn't born in 107 years ago, in 1916. That was the time when the methods of exploitation was changing, where now, like in India, you must know this better than me, that England found that direct colonialism of countries is counterproductive. People reject having foreign boots on their ground. Does this mean that England is just going to pack up and go? No, exploitation is going to continue. How? England is going to create classes where that class will act as an agent of England to exploit India. So imperialism became an internal affair of those countries, not an external affair, not a foreign coming in to do this or that, but the internal forces of India. Capitalist classes that are tied to imperialism will do the exploitation of Indians and India for the sake of imperialists. So the enemy, the foreign enemy, blonde and blue-eyed enemy disappeared. And that gave a superficial balance inside those countries, meaning what? They don't see the foreign boots. They don't see the blue-eyed British coming in with their whips and guns. So they thought that, oh, look, we are now independent. There is no imperial, there is no foreign. So this was the new method that got introduced, I believe, around 1940s and 50s and developed. How would Lenin have known this? This is the new method. So that's why let's take the basis. And I'm saying that 107 years ago, what was defined as a starting point, and I tried to give an example of this, is that the criteria that was defined by Lenin now is applied to Pakistan. Do you think that Pakistan is an imperialist country?
No.
Well, you just applied Lenin's criteria to Pakistan then.
Actually, I would love to have a debate with you, but
okay.
I'm in a different role.
That's so the short answer.
I'd love to have a debate with you, but that's for another time.
Okay, that's the short answer.
Yeah, okay. So at this point, I'm going to, I know Hisham is waiting. Hisham, there is an informal session coming up right after this, which means recording will stop. But before recording is stopped, I would ask.
I want to answer Elazar of his answer. I want to talk to Elazar about his answer to me.
Yeah, we will go there. Don't worry, we still have half an hour, but formal portion is coming to an end. And at the end of formal portion, what I ask is each of the panelists provide a 1-minute comment if you want to. And I will start with Gene. And then Gene in the informal section, everything else.
Hisham now, though.
Go ahead, Gene.
No, it should be Hisham first.
Gene? No, your microphone is turned off, Gene.
Okay, that did it finally. Yeah,
Okay.
I want to take more than 1 minute because I've been quiet, expecting I would have at least 2 minutes.
Okay,
So
take 2 minutes. Take
I
2
do
minutes.
want to address the misconceptions people have in their application of Lenin's thought to China specifically. And one problem is no one bothers to ask, well, what do the Chinese themselves think about this? And if you read the Constitution, it's quite clear the Chinese define themselves. This is the Communist Party of China, the party that led one of the historic revolutions of the modern world. And the Chinese say they are a socialist country governed by the people's democratic dictatorship led by the workers and peasants, which is in essence the dictatorship of the proletariat. So that's why they conceive themselves. And this is endorsed not only by the largest communist party in the world, 100 million Chinese communists endorse this idea. And so we now have to look not only at how they view themselves, but also what have they done? And you look at what they've done, they have eliminated poverty within China and many other countries in the world. They are pursuing a peaceful democratic route, not only for China, but in Latin America also. So we want to look carefully at this. And I react very strongly against these ideas. Oh, it's an imperialist country, because I think it is. Look at it scientifically. You abandoned science in this area, and I think we need to stick to science on this. So again, I have spoken on this in the past. Will continue to speak on this, and I have written on this. So I just want to, again, express my views on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. And I will have a much longer discussion with you separately.
Oh, just let me point out, there is a scientific term the Chinese have for Chiang Kai-shek, and that's running dog. That's the scientific term.
Okay.
Right,
All right.
from imperialism.
So after him, we'll go in the same sequence. I think the second person was Richard. So Richard, you want to summarize or say something in 1 minute or so? Richard Fallenbaum.
It's the other Richard.
Yeah, yes, I'm, well, along the same lines, I object to the characterization of Vladimir Putin and the current government as equivalent of Russia to the Saddam Hussein and various other dictators. This is a group from the Soviet times who rescued Russia from its designated position as a vassal and whatever you call it, of U.S. imperialism, a victim of U.S. imperialism, and helped the Russian people stand up. He's a hero of the anti-imperialist movement, in my opinion, and of the revolutionary movement, in my opinion. So that's my
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. So we'll go to Mehmet for his 1 minute closing statement.
No, I'll pass. I think I spoke a lot. I think Hisham is waiting and others are waiting.
Okay.
It'll be valuable.
That's fine. Then we go to Larry Shoup.
Yeah, I think there's a problem with recognizing and believing what Putin might say about occupying Ukraine or anything else, because the Russians, as you know, signed an agreement with Ukraine when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, that Ukraine would be recognized as a sovereign state. And as you also know, Putin promised many times he wasn't going to invade Ukraine, and he did invade Ukraine. So I don't think we can trust what Putin says about not wanting to occupy Ukraine. And the final statement I'd like to make is just what I've ended my talk with, because nobody mentioned it, but I think it's worth considering what our motto might be. Workers of the world unite, neither Washington nor Moscow, international revolutionary solidarity from below against fascism war, and imperialism. That's my closing statement.
Thank you, Larry. And I'll go to Elazar for your final thoughts.
I want to donate my time to Isham because I want to hear him. So I've said
Okay,
enough.
no, before we go to Hisham, I've got to, because we're past the time. So I'm going to stop the recording here because that's our procedure, but then continue as an informal discussion.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.